Have you ever thought a storm could bring more than just rain, thunder, and broken fences? That in the very moment when a roof trembles and the wind howls like it wants to rip the land in two, a single folded letter, resting quiet on a table, might hold the power to change a man's entire life that night. Sam Carter lived through such a moment, and believe me, you'll want to stay until the end of this tale. Because what followed wasn't just a test of weather, it was a test of the human heart. Before we ride any further, let me pause for just a beat. If these opening lines quickened your pulse, if you've ever felt that loneliness can roar louder than the storm outside, then tap that like button to keep these frontier stories alive. And let me know in the comments, are you listening from a quiet porch out in the country, or from a small room tucked deep in the city? I promise you this, if you stay with me until the last word. You won't just see a storm outside a ranch house. You'll feel the storm inside the chest of a man who has fought too long against silence. The Montana squall came without warning. One moment the plains were calm. The next, the wind rose up wild, sweeping dust into the black sky like chains snapped loose from a cage. Sam Carter threw his weight against the barn door, his rough hands clutching the wooden latch as the boards shook and groaned beneath the gale. Inside, cattle bawled in panic, their cries colliding with the thunder until the sound became something close to fear itself. Sam gritted his teeth, leaning hard into the door, because he knew if that latch gave way, if the roof tore loose, he wouldn't just lose his herd. He'd lose everything he had built with his own hands. For 5 years this ranch had been his gamble, his stubborn fight against loneliness and land too big for one man. It wasn't just cattle and pasture. It was proof that he hadn't been beaten by the silence of the frontier. Yet tonight, as the wind clawed at the rafters like wolves at a gate, Sam felt the land testing him once again. Are you strong enough to hold, or will it all be torn away? When at last the gusts eased, he stumbled back, arms burning from the strain, lungs heaving as though he'd just staggered off a battlefield. Dust clung to his hair and shirt. His boots dragged heavy as he made his way toward the cabin. Inside, the lamplight flickered soft against rough-hewn walls, and there on the oak table lay the letter, sealed in red wax, the Bennett crest pressed into its face. He had read it once that morning, and again just before the storm came. Still, each time, the words bore down with the same uneasy weight the Bennetts were sending him a wife. Clara Bennett, the youngest daughter. Sam sank into the chair, turning the page as though hoping the lines might change. They hadn't. Judge Horace Bennett, a man Sam knew only by reputation, had agreed to the arrangement with surprising speed. No talk of dowry, no questions about land or cattle, just a quick, almost eager acceptance. And that, more than anything, unsettled Sam. He looked through the window at the dirt road snaking into the hills. In 2 days, a wagon would appear on that road carrying the woman who, by law and promise, would become his wife. It should have been a moment of triumph, proof that his ranch and his name had grown strong enough to draw the daughter of a powerful family. Yet unease twisted inside him like a knife. He remembered seeing her only once, 3 years earlier, at the trading post in Miles City. Evelyn, the eldest, had been all polish and posture, arranging bolts of fabric with the grace of a banker's wife. Cora, the middle, had batted her lashes at a merchant with the kind of charm that sold more than words ever could. But it was Clara, the youngest, who had stopped him cold. She had knelt in the dirt beside a wounded dog, pale blue dress torn and stained with blood. Her sisters had laughed, her mother had scolded, her father had waved her off as the youngest. But Sam had watched her steady hands as she bound the dog's leg with strips ripped from her own petticoat. He had seen the way her eyes softened at the animal's whimper, the way she finished what she started despite the sting of ridicule. It wasn't beauty that had stayed with him. though she had that. Hidden beneath tangled hair and dust. It was courage. It was honesty. Qualities rare enough to be remembered 3 years later by a man sitting alone in a quiet ranch house, wondering if he had built a life meant for more than silence. Now, with the storm past but his chest still tight, Sam folded the letter again and set it aside. The cattle were safe. The roof still stood, but the unease remained. If the Bennetts were so eager to send her, why, what did they hope to gain or to rid themselves of outside? The prairie lay dark and wide, the wind whistling low across the grass as though carrying secrets. And inside, by the dying glow of lamplight, Sam Carter sat alone, with a letter that promised to change his life as surely as any storm, in many frontier homes. The supper table was where family bonds were tied tight, where the day's labor ended in warmth. But in the Bennett house, the long wooden table had become a battlefield of schemes. That night, under the dim flicker of the oil lamp, 4 faces leaned together, the father, the mother, and the 2 eldest daughters, whispering about how to rid themselves of the one they called a burden. That burden was Clara. Judge Horace Bennett sat at the head of the table, his gray mustache trembling with each heavy breath, his broad hand held tight to the letter from Sam Carter. Just a few brief lines, but to Horace it was a key, a way out of years of frustration. Beside him, Margaret Bennett sat upright like a queen on her throne, her thin lips curling into a rare smile. "You see," she said coldly, "the Lord has finally opened a door. No more will we suffer her meddling." Evelyn, the eldest daughter, leaned forward, eyes glittering like she had already spotted the prophet. "Isn't this Carter, the one who bought the Morrison spread? They say he's got the largest herd in the county, land stretching clear across the valley. Perfect. Absolutely perfect." Cora, the middle daughter, laughed a sweet sound with nothing behind it. Poor Clara. She doesn't even know she's about to be sent off like a fat goose to market. But it suits us well. The farther she goes, the less we'll have to hear her questions, see her spoil our chances. Horace tapped the table, his face lined with strain. She doesn't need to know the details. The less she knows, the better. Always asking, always prying, it's not natural. She was born to disrupt, Margaret cut in, her voice sharp as a blade. 3 years I've endured this. When she ruined the Henderson deal by sniffing into where the money came from, we could have doubled our fortune. When she humiliated young Morrison at the party by saying he was drunk and mean, time and again, opportunity slipped through our fingers, all because of her loose tongue. In the corner of the room, Grandma Hattie, frail, silver-haired, slumped in her rocker, watched with sorrow. Her old eyes flared with the last spark of protest. "She did nothing wrong," she whispered, voice trembling but clear. "Clara only spoke the truth. The sin isn't hers. The sin belongs to those who fear the truth." Margaret whipped around, her stare icy. "Mother, you're too old to understand. Truth doesn't feed a family. Truth costs us allies, money, respectability. That girl must go, far away, and she will not return." Hattie's gnarled hands clutched the arms of her chair, but there was nothing more she could do than sigh, deep and broken, and in that very moment, Clara, her granddaughter, the one she loved most, stood just outside the kitchen door. Her back pressed to the wall, her breath caught tight as each word struck her like a hammer. Burden. Spoiled our chances. A curse. Every word cut like a knife. Clara had long known her place in this house was colder than her sister's, but to hear it spoken aloud, stripped bare, was a wound deeper than scolding ever left. Her legs trembled, but she slipped away, unseen, retreating down the hall. In her grandmother's dim room, Clara collapsed into the chair beside the bed, gripping the frail hand lying there in restless sleep. "They're sending me away, Grandmama," she whispered. "Not because they love me, not because they want me happy, but because they want to cast me off like something broken. You're the only one who ever truly saw me." Moonlight spilled through the cracked window, laying a silver sheen across Clara's face. Tears welled, but she held them back. For 22 years, she had lived in a house where affection was rationed like water in drought, where kindness was coin spent only on daughters who mirrored ambition. If she collapsed now, they would take pleasure in it. She would not give them that. Still, the question tore at her. Who was this Sam Carter? Would he be another man like her father demanding silence, obedience, never satisfied? Or would he be worse, a stranger with expectations she could not meet in the front parlor? Evelyn and Cora continued their shallow laughter, while Margaret gloated over plans finally set in motion. Only Grandma Hattie, stirring awake with a dry cough, lifted her dim eyes toward the empty doorway. She knew a life was being twisted onto another road, one that might break or save it. And deep inside her weary heart, she prayed that Clara would find somewhere love was not rationed, not bartered, but freely given. Some mornings stay with a person for life not because they're bright, but because they're cold, clear through. That morning, Clara Bennett woke before the sun, the moon still hanging pale over the horizon, and the house where she had spent 22 years lay silent as a grave. Only the rasping breath of Grandma Hattie in the next room reminded her there was still one fragile tie left to cling to. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands clasped tight, her thoughts in turmoil. Last night she had heard it all, every bitter word, every scheme laid out at the supper table. Burden, curse, broken thing. Those words still spun inside her chest like thorns. Yet alongside the hurt, another fire stirred she would leave with her head high. If they meant to cast her out, then she would make certain they saw her dignity could not be broken. Clara lifted the lid of the small wooden trunk at her feet. Her life's worth fit inside a space no larger than a hay bale of faded blue dress, a leather-bound Bible with fraying corners, and a locket that had belonged to her grandmother. She folded each piece with reverence, as if care alone could replace the love her family had denied her. From the kitchen drifted the clatter of dishes, her sisters already awake. Evelyn would be at the mirror, smoothing each golden curl until it shone. Cora would be laughing too loudly at her own reflection. Clara drew a deep breath, fastened the trunk, and rose. Today would be the last day her feet crossed this floor. When she stepped into the kitchen, it was exactly as she imagined. Margaret presided at the head of the table, upright and satisfied. Judge Horace ate in silence, eyes fixed on his plate. Evelyn and Cora gleamed like peacocks, their smiles bright with triumph. "You're up," Margaret said, voice clipped and cool. "Good. This morning we announce your engagement." Clara lifted her chin, forcing down the tremor in her chest. Engagement Horace set his fork aside, tapping the knife against the plate. "Sam Carter owns a large ranch in Montana. Land, cattle, money. You'll have a good life better than you deserve." Evelyn's smile curved cruel. "Be grateful. Clara, most men wouldn't bother with you at all." "Enough," Horace muttered, but there was no defense in his tone, only dismissal. "The wagon comes at noon. You leave today." Clara bowed her head, not in submission, but to hide the flame burning in her eyes. They thought they had crushed her spirit. They hadn't. After breakfast, she slipped into her grandmother's room. Hattie lay weak but awake, her cloudy eyes still holding flickers of sharpness. Clara sank beside the bed, clutching the frail hand. "They're sending me away, Grandmama," she whispered, "to a stranger in a far land. But maybe it's the only way I'll ever be free." A hot tear slid down her cheek, but she wiped it away before it touched her grandmother's skin. "Pray for me. Pray that this time I'll find a place where I belong. In the hall." Evelyn's voice rang sharp. There she goes again, whining to that old relic. Pitiful. Clara bit her lip, stood, and squared her shoulders. She would not give them the sight of her broken. By midday, the rumble of wheels sounded on the gravel road. The horses snorted, breath steaming in the crisp autumn air. The driver climbed down, stooped and weathered, and reached for her trunk. The Bennetts stood lined on the porch like merchants selling off goods. Margaret brushed a perfunctory kiss to Clara's cheek, her whisper cold. "Don't disgrace us." Evelyn and Cora smiled with glittering malice. Horace gave only a nod, his heavy hand resting on the rail, the gesture more a dismissal than a farewell. Clara stepped up onto the wagon, skirts brushing against the rough wood. She did not look back. The wheels groaned into motion, grinding over the stones, carrying her away from the whitewashed house that gleamed too bright beneath the sun, bright as a lie. With every mile the weight on her chest eased, but with it came another weight fear. What lay ahead? A new life, or another prison? The autumn wind rushed against her face, sharp with the scent of earth and cut grass. Clara clenched her hands in her lap. Freedom or captivity, she told herself, at least from this day on. The road is mine. Hope flickered inside her, fragile as a candle flame in the wind, and with it came fear that the flame might be snuffed out before she ever found shelter. That afternoon, the dirt road narrowed into a rutted trail leading straight into a quiet valley. The driver flicked his whip, pointing ahead. "Carter Place," he muttered in his gravelly voice. Clara followed his gesture. There, rising from the wide sea of prairie grass, stood a sturdy log house, smoke curling from its chimney. Beside it loomed a weathered barn, its boards faded silver by sun and storm, with cattle grazing lazily inside the split-rail fence. The sight was both ordinary and strange. She clasped her hands tight in her lap, torn between relief and a fear that pressed heavy against her chest. Sam Carter waited on the porch, his tall frame casting a long shadow down the steps. He had been waiting since morning, heart pounding harder with every swirl of dust that marked the wagon's approach. Each step he took toward the gate seemed longer than the last. The horses snorted as the driver reined them in, the wheels grinding to a stop. Clara lifted her chin, revealing a face sharpened by worry, but lit with clear, steady eyes. For a moment, Sam nearly lost his words. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice rough but steady, hand outstretched. Clara hesitated before laying her small hand in his. His grip was firm, warm, gentler than she expected. "Mr. Carter," she answered, her voice quiet, nearly swept away by the wind. The driver set her trunk on the ground, tipped his hat, and turned the wagon back toward town. The creak of wheels faded, leaving only silence, two strangers, now bound together, standing alone at the edge of the prairie. "Let me," Sam said, hefting the trunk with ease. He led her inside. The floorboards creaked under their boots, and the air smelled of pine and simmering stew. Clara glanced around solid furniture, shelves of worn books, a small vase of wildflowers already wilting but still clinging to color. Simple, yes, but with a kind of honesty she hadn't expected. Sam set the trunk down near the door, dust clinging to his sleeves. "You must be tired from the ride. I've stew and bread. Nothing fancy. But it's hot." Clara managed a small smile. "That's more than enough." They sat across from one another at the wooden table. The fire in the hearth snapped and hissed, throwing light that danced across their faces. Sam ladled stew into a bowl and set it before her. Clara wrapped her hands around the warm ceramic, the rich smell rising to meet her, soothing some of the chill that had lodged in her chest. Silence stretched, heavy as a wool blanket. Clara kept her eyes low, spoon moving carefully. Sam studied her openly, but not with the cold calculation she had grown used to at the Bennett house. His gaze was searching, thoughtful, as if he were reading a rare book. At last, Sam set his spoon down. His voice came low, deliberate. Your family said little of you, except that you were practical. But I remember something else. Clara's brow furrowed. What do you mean? 3 years ago, in Miles City, I saw you kneel in the dirt, your blue dress torn, binding a dog's leg. Folks laughed. Your mother scolded you, but you didn't stop. You ripped your own dress to save it. That wasn't practicality. That was courage. Her spoon froze midway. Heat rushed to her cheeks, half shame, half surprise. For years that moment had felt like a mark of foolishness, a memory used to mock her. Now, here it was named as a virtue. You. Remember that she whispered. Sam nodded, his dark eyes steady. I remember thinking that anyone willing to ruin a fine dress for a suffering creature was someone worth knowing better. Clara's chest tightened, a strange warmth spreading through her. For once she was not invisible, not dismissed, but seen for the very thing her family despised. She ducked her head, hiding a trembling smile behind the curl of steam rising from her bowl. The meal went on, words scarce, but the silence no longer felt quite so heavy. The awkwardness lingered, but beneath it flickered a fragile spark, like a fire just beginning to catch. When Sam rose to carry her trunk into the small back bedroom, Clara followed. The bed was neatly made. A plain quilt smoothed across it, and a tiny vase with fading flowers sat on the table. It's not much, Sam said, hat in hand, but I wanted it ready for you. Clara touched the quilt with careful fingers, her throat tight. It's more than I expected. For a moment they stood there, two strangers caught between formality and something softer neither dared name. Sam gave a small nod, then stepped back toward the hall, leaving her alone. She sat on the bed, fingers lingering on the fabric. Her heart thudded fast, replaying his words. That wasn't practicality. That was courage. For the first time in years, the memory of that day no longer burned as shame. It glowed instead, something she could carry with pride. Out there, where the oil lamps of the saloons cast their yellow light across dusty boardwalks, stories carried more power than bullets. They passed from one table to the next, from a farmer's nod to a merchant's chuckle. Soon enough, a single whisper could harden into truth the whole town was ready to believe. And the man fanning those flames was Victor Langston. Victor sat in the largest saloon, chair tipped back as though at ease, though his eyes were sharp as knives. A glass of whiskey twirled in his hand, his voice smooth as honey made to slide into the ear. You fellows hear the news, he said, pitched just loud enough for the cowhands at the next table. Sam Carter's brought home a wife, not just any wife, Clara Bennett. One of the farmers frowned. Bennett? That fancy family over by Riverbend. Victor smiled, sipping slow. The very same. But don't be fooled by the name. You know why Sam got her so quick? No dowry, no haggling, just a nod, and done. Because he leaned in, voice dropping but still carrying. The Bennetts couldn't keep her, couldn't stomach her in their own house, cast out. Now tell me, what kind of luck does a woman like that bring? The men shifted. Murmurs rose. One cowhand spat onto the floorboards. If her own folks didn't want her, there's got to be reason. Victor caught the glance, a curl of triumph inside him. He remembered all too well the day Clara humiliated him, exposing his tricks before a crowd. Now his chance for payback was here. And rumor, he knew, was sharper than any Colt revolver. 10 miles away, at the Carter Ranch, Sam and Clara moved about their small log house, unaware of the storm already gathering in town. Morning on the ranch brought rhythm, Clara rising early to stoke the fire, sweep the hearth, set breakfast. Sam showed her the land, the pastures, the corrals, the fences he had hammered into place with his own hands. Clara listened, her eyes bright with quiet admiration. Yet deep inside, unease lingered. Because silence, she knew, never stayed harmless for long. Beyond the hills, in town, there would be eyes watching, mouths talking. "Do you think they'll accept me?" she asked softly as they stood by the fence rail. Sam looked at her. Steady. "The town always talks. They'll gossip. They'll guess. But what matters isn't what they say. It's how we live." The words were firm, but Clara's chest still tightened. She had lived too many years under sharp eyes and sweeter-than-poison taunts. She knew well, rumors traveled faster than fire. The next afternoon, Sam returned from town, supplies piled in the wagon bed. Clara saw the set of his jaw, the shadow across his brow. "Something's wrong," she said at once. He set the sack of flour hard on the table, stood a moment in silence, then said, "They're talking about you, saying your folks cast you out, saying you're trouble." Clara froze, hands knotting together, her face drained of color, as though the words themselves had struck her square in the chest. Just as she had feared, the past had followed her here. "I knew it," her voice broke. "I knew they'd twist everything against me. No matter where I go, I can't escape it." Sam stepped closer, his hand strong on her shoulder. "Let them talk. I know the truth. I won't let lies define you." Clara lifted her eyes to his, aching to believe. Yet the sting in her heart remained. She knew too well the weight of rumor. It asked for no proof. It only needed repetition, told and retold, until the town wore it like gospel. And in the saloon, that very night, Victor Langston poured another drink, his words flowing as smooth as the whiskey in his glass. Every chuckle, every nod, was another spark. The wind of rumor was building, and soon it would sweep across the plains straight to the Carter Ranch, testing the fragile bond that had only just begun to grow between Sam and Clara. That night, the Montana sky was black as polished glass, scattered with thin stars and a sliver of new moon. The Carter Ranch lay quiet, nothing but crickets in the grass and wind around the eaves of the log house. Clara lay awake in the small back room, her eyes fixed on the ceiling beams, when suddenly a sound tore through the silence, the panicked bawling of cattle. She bolted upright, heart hammering. At the same moment, Sam swung from his bed, shoving on his boots, rifle slung over his shoulder. "Stay in the house, Clara," he barked, voice hard as iron. But by the time he charged out onto the porch, she was already following close behind. The sight before them was chaos, the fence broken wide, posts splintered and leaning, the herd flooding into the open pasture, eyes white in the moonlight, hooves thundering like a storm. The ground shook with their frenzy. Sam ran straight into the yard, shouting above the roar. "Drive 'em back toward the pens. Don't let 'em scatter." His arms cut the air as he tried to turn the herd. Clara, skirts catching on dry grass, hair tumbling loose, ignored his command and plunged after him. A young steer, crazed with fear, barreled toward the broken section of fence. Clara didn't think, she simply stepped into its path, hands raised, voice firm but steady. "Easy now. Easy. Slow down." Somehow, impossibly. The animal faltered, breath steaming, long enough for Sam to swing around and push it back toward the herd. Side by side they fought the chaos, Sam shouting, waving his arms, Clara clapping her hands, calling, her calm voice cutting through the madness. Dust coated their faces, sweat burned their eyes, but neither gave ground. Sam had never seen a woman hold so steady in danger, and for a moment his anger and fear were swallowed by sheer astonishment. At last, the final cow stumbled back into the corral. Sam dropped his rifle into the dirt, chest heaving. He turned to Clara, eyes blazing with both fear and fury. "You could have been killed." Clara braced her hands on her knees, breath ragged. "And what about you? You think I'd stand inside while you fought it alone?" He froze, her words striking deep, slowly. The fire in his gaze softened. Her defiance, her stubbornness. It was the very steel that had carried them through the night. Before either could speak again, lantern light flickered along the road. A cluster of riders approached, horses stamping, voices low. At their head rode Victor Langston, coat too fine for midnight work, his smile sharp as glass. "Well, well," Victor called, feigning surprise. "Cattle loose, fences broken. Carter, looks like you're in a bad way." Sam straightened, jaw tight. "What are you doing here?" Langston Victor raised his hands in mock innocence. "Heard the noise. Came with the others to lend a hand. Neighborly duty. You know." But his eyes slid toward Clara, lips curling. Trouble does have a way of following certain folks. The men behind him shifted uneasily, glancing from Victor to Clara. Sam stepped forward, voice cutting clear. "She saved half the herd tonight. If not for Clara, I'd have nothing left. Don't you dare lay blame at her feet." Victor's smirk faltered, though he covered it with a shrug. "Have it your way. Carter. I only came out of concern, but don't say I didn't warn you bad luck sticks to the ones even their kin can't keep." With that, he wheeled his horse, lantern bobbing as he and his men disappeared back down the road. Clara stood trembling, dust streaking her face, breath still uneven. Sam turned to her, his rough hand settling firm on her shoulder. "You don't need to prove anything, not to him, not to this town. I know who you are." She met his gaze, and for the first time the fear in her chest loosened its grip. What Victor would never understand was the strength that came from two people standing shoulder to shoulder. Rumors could spread, fences could break, enemies could plot in the dark, but tonight had shown her the truth. The real power wasn't in whispers. It was in courage, in trust, in unity, and in that moment, amid dust and broken posts. Clara realized she and Sam had faced the storm together, and won. By noon the next day, the sun beat down hard on the small Montana town, the wooden planks of the boardwalk creaking under every step. The rumors from the night before had spread like fire on dry grass. Folks whispered in the general store, muttered at the blacksmith's, and even the children repeated Clara's name with doubtful giggles. Sam Carter wasn't a man to bow under gossip, but he knew silence only gave Victor Langston more ground. So when word came that Victor was standing outside the saloon, stirring up a crowd with Clara's name on his tongue, Sam made his choice. He saddled his horse. "Clara," he said, his voice low but firm, "if you stay behind, they'll think you've got something to hide. The only way is to face them together." Clara stood on the porch, hands clenched tight. Fear was still there, but something stronger flickered in her eyes. "I've run all my life. Sam. Today. I won't run." They rode side by side into town, hooves drumming a steady rhythm on the dirt road. Heads turned as they passed, whispers chasing them to the saloon steps where Victor held court. A ring of townsfolk gathered around him as though watching a stage play. Victor, polished vest gleaming, smiled like a man already victorious. Well, well, Carter, and his new bride. Just in time. His voice carried loud, meant for every ear. "I was just telling these good folks a simple story, that a man brings ruin on himself when he takes in a woman, her own family cast out. The crowd murmured. A few eyes turned toward Clara, suspicion flickering. Sam's jaw tightened. He stepped forward. "You're right about one thing. Langston, I did stake my future on this woman." He turned his gaze to Clara, his eyes burning steady. "And I'd do it again." Victor barked a laugh. Blind fool. No wise man gambles his land on a woman unwanted by her own kin. That's proof enough, isn't it? The crowd hushed, waiting. Clara took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. Her voice rang out clearer than she thought possible. "Yes, they cast me out. But do you know why every head turned? They cast me out because I spoke the truth. I called out men who beat their wives after too much whiskey. I exposed a lawyer's crooked contracts. I stopped land deals that cheated farmers. My father wanted silence. My sisters wanted me blind. I could not be. So they called me a burden, a curse. If that is my crime, then yes, I am guilty." She drew a breath, eyes sweeping the crowd. "But look at last night. When the herd broke loose, when chaos threatened to crush everything, I didn't run. I stood beside my husband, and if I had to do it again, I would." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then an old rancher in the front nodded slowly. I saw her face down that young steer. She didn't flinch. "She's telling the truth." Another voice followed Langston. "You weren't there." But she was. Victor's face twitched, and he tried to cut back in. "Don't be fools. She's dressing up her shame in pretty words." But the tide had shifted. Whispers rolled through the crowd, no longer hungry for scandal, but wary of Victor himself. Sam seized the moment, his voice ringing like a hammer on iron. "Langston has poured enough poison. He twists truth into lies. But hear me, this woman is no curse. She's the reason my herd is alive today. If there's anyone worth trusting, it's Clara Bennett Carter." The murmurs turned to nods. A few hands clapped. Victor's smirk crumbled. His eyes darted, seeking support, finding little. "You'll regret this," he spat, and stalked into the shadow of the saloon, leaving the crowd unsettled but no longer convinced. Sam reached for Clara's hand, lifting it high before all. "This is my wife, my partner, my equal. Any man who doubts her will answer to me." The crowd slowly broke apart, but the air had changed. Some tipped their hats to Clara in quiet respect. A few women offered her soft words, their eyes less hard, less judging. On the ride home, Clara sat straighter in the saddle, her hand firm in Sam's. Her body still trembled, but her gaze shone. She had spoken the truth, faced it square, and for the first time in her life, instead of mockery, her honesty had been met with silence and with belief. Sam glanced over, a rare smile tugging his lips. "You stood your ground." "Clara." She answered softly, her voice steady now. "Not just me. Sam. We did." That evening, as the sun dipped behind the blue ridge of distant mountains, Sam and Clara rode back toward the Carter ranch. The dirt road still carried the marks of their horses' hooves, but their hearts felt lighter than at any point before. The town had heard Clara's truth in her own words, and Sam had stood firm beside her. Suspicion had not vanished completely, but trust had begun to take root. Riding behind Sam, Clara let the prairie wind stream through her hair. For once, the silence inside her did not weigh like chains. It felt different now, like a clean slate, like the first hint of dawn. For the first time in her life, the word belonging carried a meaning she could believe. The ranch came into view in the glow of twilight, the small log house, the barn still standing strong after the sabotage, smoke curling from the chimney as if announcing a home. Sam tied off the horses, then reached for Clara's hand. No words were needed. His steady gaze said it all. "We made it through. That night, they sat together on the porch, wooden chairs creaking beneath the weight of exhaustion and relief. Above them, the Montana sky glittered with stars, the cattle in the pasture finally quiet. Sam broke the silence, his voice low and warm. "Clara, from now on this ranch isn't just mine. It's ours." Clara's smile glowed in the lamplight, her eyes shining like embers. "I once thought I'd never have a place to call home. But maybe God led me here for a reason." In that moment, every storm, every whisper, every rejection from her past seemed to fade into the distance. On this land, carved out of loneliness, they had found something new, a rebirth not built on power or reputation, but on trust and love. The days that followed settled into a steady rhythm. Sam repaired the fence posts, while Clara tended the garden she'd planted near the porch. Mornings began with firewood and simple meals. Evenings closed with books read by the oil lamp, or quiet sewing while Sam mended tack. Words weren't always necessary. The presence of one another filled the silences once haunted by emptiness. In town, curious eyes watched, waiting for cracks. But instead they saw Clara walking the market with calm dignity, meeting every gaze without flinching. They saw Sam at her side, steady and unashamed. Slowly, nods of greeting began tentative at first, then more frequent. Trust, like a wound healing, was knitting itself back together. Victor Langston had not given up, of course, but his defeat outside the saloon cost him dearly. Whispers no longer bent so easily to his will. His schemes lost the luster they once held. Clara knew he would return in time, but fear no longer gnawed at her. She had Sam. More importantly, she had herself no longer bowed by the weight of rejection. One crisp autumn morning, Clara leaned against the fence rail, watching Sam drive the herd into pasture. Sunlight spilled golden across the field, gilding the lines of his weathered face. She realized love was not built in grand declarations. It was in the way a man carried burdens without complaint, the way he shielded what mattered when storms came. Sam had done that for her. And on the night of chaos, she had done the same for him. Two lives once pressed into corners by fate had found each other, and in doing so, found renewal. And to you, dear listeners, this story isn't only about Sam Carter and Clara Bennett. It's a mirror for anyone who's ever been called a burden, ever been cast aside for telling the truth. What we see here is simple yet profound. Real love does not erase the past. It embraces it, turning pain into strength and rejection into belonging. If you felt the courage in Clara's heart, or the steadfastness in Sam's hands, lend them your support. Their story is only beginning. Ahead lie new challenges, new storms, and Victor Langston, will he return with darker schemes? How will Sam and Clara defend the home they've begun to build together? Let us know in the comments what path should they take next. Should Clara step further into town life, or will she find her strength rooted here on the ranch? And if this tale touched you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. Every gesture of support keeps these Western stories alive, stories where love and truth matter more than rumor or riches. That night, as darkness covered the Carter ranch and the oil lamp shone soft through the window, Sam and Clara sat close by the fire. There were no flowery promises, no need for them. Their peace was answer enough, and in that peace, their love began to root deep, stronger than rumor, stronger than malice, stronger than any storm the wide Montana sky might send their way.